Hello, this is the continuation of the video series where I'm reading chapters from my book, Beatrice Blinks. This is going to start with Chapter 3. Chapter 3, No Sleep. Beatrice saw in quite a few journals her many attempts at tracking her sleep. Sometimes she would simply jot down the time she planned on sleeping, but future journaling made it clear she rarely slept when she planned to. A normal human being can wake up in the middle of the night and get back to sleep without much bother. Beatrice waking up in the middle of the night was a whole production. She would wake up without recent memories, read the letter, and stay awake without a clue that she was in the middle of attempting a full night of sleep. All of the various times of day she recorded in journals made it clear she didn't sleep very often, and she certainly didn't have a consistent bedtime. Beatrice often wondered if she could survive on less sleep than the average person. Her bookcase betrayed an interest in psychology, and she had left a bookmark on a page describing hypomania. It was one of the major moods associated with bipolar disorder, and it involved sleeping very little, feeling impulsive, and sometimes having rapid thoughts. Sometimes it involves starting multiple creative projects and often abandoning those projects just as impulsively as they began. Beatrice's condition pushed her into a kind of forced hypomania. She was brilliant and had very little time to take advantage of that brilliance, which led to hurried projects that she'd unfortunately leave behind whenever her memory was erased. Her lack of sleep was amplifying the effects. Beatrice wasn't certain what insanity felt like because everything felt new to her. But she knew that she'd never be normal. She wondered how she survived, both in the practical sense and the existential sense. In the practical sense, it seemed unlikely she could hold down a job in her current state. And in the existential sense of the word survival, she wondered how her fragile mind could deal with all these obstacles in her way. More than anything, she wanted to hold on to her life. It was more than just her memories that she lost each time. She lost her goals, her progress, and her very sense of self. The journals, full of opinions, showed how much she longed to know herself better. The experiments she journaled about showed how much she wanted to know the world better. She wanted to be allowed to want things. She wanted more than this life could give her. Chapter 4, The Benefactor. There was a simple answer to how her practical needs were being met. Her brother James took care of such things. He lived in the same apartment complex, paid her rent, and stocked her fridge. His notes were scattered about the apartment, but were far less interesting than her journals. They would say things like, "We had dinner at 5 p.m. You complimented my shirt. We had an argument. I went home at 5:21. These messages didn't capture her interest. They barely even captured her attention. She could speculate sometimes about what her brother James wasn't telling her. For instance, did he know what had happened to her to make her like this? Did he resent needing to take care of her? Did he share her intellect? And if so, why were his notes so boring? Whenever he came by, she would bluntly ask him these things, and his answers never seemed to hold her interest or even calm her suspicions. If he was telling her the truth, it was a boring truth. If he was lying to her, the world was far more interesting than he was letting on. She always preferred to believe the latter. James had a pretty unbelievable story whenever she asked, "What happened to me?" He claimed that he didn't know. He would tell the story of his envy when they were teenagers, as it seemed he was certain she'd get into any college she set her heart on. And she was poised to get into MIT, but on her 18th birthday she started having these unsettling gaps in memory. She remembered things like algebra, but forgot things like what she ate for breakfast. She had read the first half of the Princess Bride book more times than she could count. And every time she started reading it, the story was brand new to her. That worked to her advantage with good books like Princess Bride. It made other things unnecessarily tedious. She had tried learning about current political topics, but nothing stuck around in her brain, so she always came across as the least informed person in every argument. That never seemed to stop her from arguing with people online, but at least she felt some shame about how little knowledge she accumulated. Her Rolling Stone gathered no moss. Beatrice didn't sugarcoat it when she asked James if he resented taking care of her. He shrugged and offered the useless phrase, "It is what it is." She got the sense he enjoyed being the hero in their family, but it turns out he was her only sibling. So he really didn't have much choice in the matter, unless he wanted his sister to be helpless in the world. Their parents had passed away in a car accident around the same time she lost her memories. Beatrice asked if the two events were connected somehow. James said it was unlikely since she lost her memory a few months before they died. Since her memory loss hadn't caused the car accident, and the accident hadn't caused her memory loss, it was probably a coincidence. James admitted to honestly being jealous that Beatrice spent most of her time unaware that her parents were dead. James didn't have the option to forget. The downside is that every time Beatrice did learn her parents had died, the wound was fresh, and her poor brother was usually the one to break the news. It seemed very curious that Beatrice didn't journal about her parents being dead. Maybe she hoped to shield herself from that reality. Some things are worth forgetting. Beatrice was a little more diplomatic when asking James about his intelligence. She would start by assuming he was brilliant and giving him the option to correct that assumption. It would take the form of a quick comment like, "Of course we're siblings, so you're just as smart as I am." Perhaps James suffered from the weakness known as humility, but he never accepted her compliment with grace. He just insisted his intellect was mediocre at best and that he still looked up to her. Beatrice suspected that James had hidden talents that were perhaps hidden to him as well. She knew they were genetically tied together, and her brain was far from mediocre. James had a habit of never giving himself enough credit, although that was merely her own theory. Beatrice's condition made James something of a stranger to her. She remembered her childhood well enough, and James was a big part of that childhood, but this adult version of James seemed very foreign to her. She didn't believe that he knew himself well enough to answer all of her questions, and knowing too little about himself was something that they had in common.